And thank you all for coming out this morning. I'm Phil Andrews. I'm running for county executive because Montgomery County needs to get its competitive edge back, and we need to do three things to do it. Number one, we have to be more competitive in terms of our own negotiations with our county labor unions. That's what drives our budget. 70% of our budget, of our operating budget, is pay and benefits. And so if we don't control that, we don't control the budget. I'm the only candidate running who doesn't take any campaign funds from the groups that the county executive negotiates with, namely our public employee unions and developers. So I ask yourself, who do you think is going to get the better deal? Second, we need to do better in terms of our relationship in Annapolis. This has been a problem for years, and we've gotten clobbered. It's gotten worse recently. We get 20 cents back on our tax dollars that we send to Annapolis, and in 2012, the state legislature put Montgomery County in a straitjacket with an extreme maintenance of effort law regarding school funding that ties our hands and makes it very difficult to balance the budget. Also makes it difficult to provide more funding when we are locked in. Third, we need to make sure that we are more competitive in the region in terms of jobs, and we have to control our taxes to do that. What drives taxes? The cost of the county government. What drives the cost of the county government? The cost of paying benefits. In 2005, when Mr. Duncan proposed a 20-year retirement for career firefighters, I was the only one that voted against that. We didn't need to do that. Very expensive. In 2009, as council president, Mr. Leggett sent over a provision that required us to pay county pensions as if a pay raise that we canceled hadn't been canceled. I led the effort that repealed that, saving $280 million. I voted against the pay increase last year that was excessive. We need tough leadership. I'll provide that. Thank you for being here.
Mr. Duncan. Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for sponsoring this debate. I do want to point out we went through a very elaborate, formal process of drawing straws to see where we would stand here, and then they put us in alphabetical order. So anyway, I'm proud to have served as county executive in the past. This is a great, great county, and I'm proud to have worked together with so many people in our community to help make improvements, in our schools with all-day kindergarten, with reduced class sizes, with reading specialists for our children. I'm proud about what we did in revitalizing downtown Silver Spring and building the Strathmore Concert Hall, Glen Echo Park, Germantown Town Center, getting more funds from Annapolis. There's a lot of great things that we did together. And then after serving as county executive, I decided to run for governor. And a not-so-funny thing happened to me on my way to Annapolis. I was diagnosed with major depression. I pulled out of the race to get healthy for myself and for my family. And I talk about that a lot because one, men need to talk about depression more, but two, you can get treatment and you can feel better. And that's my message to people around this county and everywhere I go is you don't have to be miserable, you don't have to suffer from depression. Treatment works. I am living proof of that. So I would encourage anyone here who is struggling with issues or knows someone to encourage them to seek treatment as well. So here I am back running for county executive. It's a critical time for this county. It is a critical time for the future of this county. Our schools are terribly overcrowded. The pressures on our schools are increasing dramatically because many more students are now living in poverty in this county. Many more students don't have English as their first language. We are in a jobless recovery from this last recession. The economy is not doing what it should be doing in this county. Annapolis, thanks to our current county leaders, is taking us for granted. We're not getting back the dollars that we should be getting from Annapolis. And our county leaders are frozen in indecision about what to do about the Silver Spring Transit Center, which is a debacle. So what this county needs is a hands-on county executive who's going to tackle these problems. We need stronger leadership who can get things done here in Montgomery County. We need stronger leadership who will fight for our interests in Annapolis. And we need stronger leadership who's got the right vision for our future. That's what I'm offering you. That's what I'm offering the people of Montgomery County. And that's why I'm running for Montgomery County Executive again. Thank you. Mr. Leggett.
President Truman indicated in his opening statement that you should look at the details and look at this race. Look at some numbers. 42%. That was the increase over the prior 4 years before I assumed this office, county executive. The budget increased by 42%. 1 year alone, 14%. For you business persons who are here, think of how you would operate a business at that level, that cost. Another number, 100,000. That's the number of jobs that we're looking at based on the development and the issues that we put forth to increase jobs in Montgomery County. $1 billion. That's the amount of dollars that we're getting from the state to help us in our transportation needs. Keep in mind that I was a person who went to Annapolis each and every year arguing for transportation dollars to ensure that we could do the things that we wanted to do here in Montgomery County. That we look today at what we see what is happening. The Smart Growth Initiative in Shady Grove, the Carter City Transit Way that's coming along, the Purple Line. Look at all of the things that are happening because we've been able to move forward, because we provided budgets that are sustainable. I indicated earlier 42%. For the next 5 years under my administration, we eliminated 10% of the jobs in Montgomery County, and we had zero, for 5 years cumulative, zero job growth. That's the foundation on which we are standing today. And today, we are standing with the highest financial reserves in the history of Montgomery County.
Thank you, Mr. Leggett. We'll start the questioning. We've all touched on a number of issues that we will ask questions about. So, Mr. Andrews, you first. The recent report of the Nighttime Economy Task Force appointed by Mr. Leggett suggests the county, and I quote, is failing to attract sufficient young people in order to replace and sustain the tax base, unquote. Which recommendations of the Nighttime Economy Task Force do you support and which do you not support? And I'd also ask what other steps should be taken to attract younger residents to the county in the future.
Well, thank you, Lou. There are a number of things that we need to do to attract young people to the county and to keep people who have lived here a long time, and they are connected in many ways. And the connector to both of those is the cost of living here. It's very expensive for young people right out of college to be able to afford Montgomery County. Our housing is expensive. Our rents are going up faster than the cost of a single-family home. So that's part of it. Supply of housing in transit areas will help. Having vibrant downtowns helps, and Silver Spring, Bethesda do have that, and that's good, and we need to build on that. We need to keep taxes reasonable so that young people can afford them. We've had 3 straight years now of property tax rate increases that I have opposed, and we have an energy tax rate that's the highest in the region. So we need to keep it affordable, and that needs to be done by the county executive taking the lead on that. In terms of having vibrant downtowns, part of what needs to be done is to reform the liquor laws that are decided at the state level. It's a patchwork, as I think people know, and we need to do much better in terms of working to change that. We have to get the state legislature to agree, and I and other council members have been working to do that. But real limitations exist on the number of liquor licenses for chains and for other institutions, which we're working to change. I think that young people also are increasingly looking for transit-oriented communities, and that's great, and we are building those. That's where most of our development is going to be in the next 20, 30 years. So all those things are attractive to young people, as is our general quality of life.
Thank you. Mr. Duncan, Mr. Leggett, you each have 90 seconds to...
Yeah, Lou, here's the problem. Our county leaders, these 2 men and the rest of the county council decided that, or learned that, not enough 20-somethings, not enough of the millennial generation is moving into our county. And here's their answer. We're going to create a nightlife commission so we can keep our bars open later to keep these young people here. That's not the answer. The answer is we need to create a startup culture in this county, which we had when I left office and which the current county leadership has walked away from, to entice young people here, to help start companies, to get them going, and to grow jobs here. We need to be the leader again in the startup economy. That's what's going to bring people here. When you aggregate and you create these creative centers of people looking to start companies, that's what's going to make the difference for us. All the entertainment stuff, all that sort of comes after that. But the crux of it is we need to be a leader in the innovation economy. I started the county incubator program here. We are now walking away from that. We're throwing out 38 companies at the Shady Grove incubator. We're going to close the Wheaton incubator. We should be finding ways to expand our incubator opportunities, to expand our startup opportunities, and make Montgomery County a startup leader. While our current county leaders stood back, sat down, did nothing to enhance the startup environment in Montgomery County, DC leapfrogged us, Virginia leapfrogged us. We were the leader in the region and the state. we are lagging way behind now. That's the answer to attracting younger people here, creating an active startup culture.
Mr. Leggett.
Well, I think if you go back and look at the records, you'll see that the young people started leaving Montgomery County in the 90s. And we're simply reflecting that today, so it's not something that's new. Secondly, cybersecurity is probably the most innovative thing for which young people are attracted to today, and that's what we're doing. Thirdly, we are enhancing and investing quite a bit into biohealth technology. And so the jobs, the transit-oriented development, all of those things are working in harmony. But to try and change that does not change overnight. It will continue an effort that we've started right here. If you look right around the corner here in White Flint, and you see the transit-oriented development that's there. You see the jobs that have been created. So to assume that all of a sudden young people decided overnight that they're going to move to the district of DuPont, Circle, and Arlington, and Alexandria is not correct. They started leaving a long time ago. And we are continuing the jobs that I think young people will want today. But to make the assumption that we can simply change that culture overnight is not something that I buy into. It is a cultural change that we need to work at for a period of time, and we're committed to do that. And if you look at the report, I think the report is more than just simply talking about opening bars and closing late at night.
Thank you. Next question to Mr. Duncan.
Oh, actually, don't I get 60 seconds?
Oh, sorry. I apologize. You have 60 seconds.
Thank you.
Moderator's mistake.
Thank you. That's
Okay.
all right. That's okay. Well, I have knocked on more than 18,000 doors since January of 2013 to hear directly what's on people's minds. And I do hear a lot from young people and older people that the cost of living in Montgomery County is an obstacle to them staying here, even if they might be able to afford it in some cases. Certainly for people who are deciding whether to stay here, it's hard to justify it if the cost is so much more here. So we have to compensate for that with good programs, with transit-oriented development, with quality of life, but we also have to do what we can do, and we can control the costs that affect them. And we set the tax rates. We set that cost, and that cost has been going up, up, and up. And so that's what I hear from young people and older people when I'm out knocking on doors. Control costs better, more value for the tax dollar.
Thank you. My apologies for almost cutting you off. Next question to Mr. Duncan. The House of Delegates in Annapolis today is debating legislation to raise the state's minimum wage to $10.10. While, as now written, the law would allow Montgomery and Prince George's to implement their recent decisions to raise the county's minimum wage to $11.50 between now and 2017. Would the county be placed at less of a competitive disadvantage if it instead was covered by pending state legislation to raise the minimum to $10.10 by 2016, or do you agree with the recent decision of the county council to raise it to $11.50?
Well, I had initially stated that I thought the county should work with the state to try to raise the minimum wage. We need to raise the minimum wage across the country. It's far too low. It needs to be a federal deal. That's not going to happen with the current makeup of the Congress. So states are looking at doing certain things. And I initially talked about we need to do something with the state because Montgomery County is not an economic island. What we do here does impact and is impacted by actions in other communities. The county council, I think to their credit, went and said, well, we're not going to do it ourselves. We're going to go with the district and with Prince George's County to implement a higher minimum wage. So it's sort of a regional thing, which I support. What I want, though, is I want the state of Maryland to raise it to $10.10 because that would certainly put us in a much better competitive advantage than if it stays at $7.25 across the rest of the state. And I'm confident the state of Maryland is going to do that this session.
Mr. Leggett, 90 seconds.
Yeah. Well, I'm hearing something different. In an early debate in Bethesda, you stated that you thought that we should wait, that it was wrong for the three-area jurisdiction to, in fact, raise the minimum wage, and that we were not the economic engine by itself. Now I'm hearing that it's a good thing for us to do it. I supported a 10-10 going back a year ago. I said it was the right thing to do, and I chided the council. I chided the county council. I chided the chambers, because I said at that point in time that the chambers should get behind that because that would be the low mark. And if you supported that, we could get this behind us. And the chamber did not do so. Now we're looking at $11.50 in Montgomery County, and people are saying, wow, what happened? Well, you should have got on board when it was 10-10. My original proposal was to have it simply $1 above whatever the state would provide. I have been consistent about that. I fought for it. No one else here on this podium fought for that. People are saying today, I support it. Well, you should have been with last year in Annapolis or at the rallies in support of that. My view has been consistent. It is wrong to have the wages at the level that we have. And I supported it at 10.50, and last year I accepted 10.10 because it was the right thing to do at that point in time. We're reinventing history here this morning.
Mr. Andrews?
I've been very consistent on this. My view is that the state should raise the minimum wage to 10.10. I was a co-sponsor of the county's resolution back in the last fall to urge them to do so, and the council should have waited to see what the state ends up doing because it's clear that they were going to raise the minimum wage, and it's just a matter of what it is. There are problems with having a minimum wage that is less than statewide. Our minimum wage law in the county doesn't cover some of our municipalities, so you have a situation where you can have workers across the street, businesses across the street from each other under different wage laws. That's a problem. Poolsville, Barnesville, several other municipalities aren't covered by our county law, and all the others could opt out if they wanted to. It's also important for our minimum wage law and the state minimum wage law to be fairly close to each other, because otherwise you create competitive disadvantages for Montgomery County businesses. So I've been very consistent on this. I did vote against the county minimum wage law for that reason, and I am glad to see the state moving forward with its proposal.
Mr. Duncan, 60 seconds for the last word.
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. Well, okay, we'll move on in that case. Next question to Mr. Leggett. There's a widespread perception in the business community that Montgomery County is business unfriendly. Do you think this view is justified? And what are the three most important steps the county needs to take to increase its competitiveness, particularly as compared to our neighbors in Northern Virginia?
Well, there's a perception, but at some point in time, the perception becomes reality. The perception has been that Montgomery County, too many regulations, we're overtaxed, and it takes too much time and confusion. This is why I moved, for example, to provide 67 recommendations to change the regulatory scheme for land use in Montgomery County. 67 recommendations. For example, it used to take us approximately 8 weeks to get a fire code inspection. Today, it takes 3 days at maximum. There are things that we can do. I wanted to go even further than that. I suggested a number of changes between parking planning and the county government. We got in a lot of challenges about that. You may recall a couple of years ago, and I said that we needed to combine the police of the county police and the park police. Big outcry behind that. We can't do that. You can't have those two police operating together. And people assumed at that point in time that the county executive's office was trying to take over park and planning. We're not. But I simply believe that our procedures are too confusing, too costly, and they bear on the rate of development in our county. So I think we should change that. And that perception to me is something that we're working very hard to make sure we get around it. So there's a challenge as it relates to regulatory reform, taxes, and of course the overall perception. And that's something that we've been working on, and I agree with some of those perceptions because we've been our own worst enemy, because we have not been able to move forward to make the kinds of changes that I want, and I'm on record of saying we need to bring those changes in order to eliminate some of the confusion. I believe very strongly we should do that.
Mr. Andrews?
Well, we can't legislate in a vacuum. We have to recognize that we have competition among the regional jurisdictions, and we have to be cognizant of that. Our energy tax is by far the highest in the region. In 2010, Mr. Leggett proposed a huge increase in it, said it would be limited to 2 years, and 2 years later, he proposed keeping it all. I led the efforts the last 2 years, with my colleagues, reduced it by 10% each year of that increase, and I'm committed to making sure we bring it back down to what it was in 2010, which was still a pretty sizable level. So that's one. We need to also to make sure that our government is working more efficiently, that people can get through our system in reasonable time. There's nothing more frustrating than someone to get different advice from the same agency when they're going through the process, and I hear that as I'm out knocking on doors. Third, I have to disagree with Mr. Leggett's proposal that he described to merge the park police with county police. The park police do an incredible job. It's one of the reasons our parks are so safe, and their pay and benefit structure is actually less than our county police. It would have required more money if you brought them into the county police department and paid them with the same benefits that our county police receive. That did not make sense to me to do that.
Mr. Duncan, 90 seconds.
Yeah, there are two challenges, two very serious challenges facing the business community in the state of Maryland. One is the state of Maryland's tax structure is not competitive. We lost that competitiveness over the last 8 years. Our state personal income tax, our state corporate income tax, our state estate tax are not helping us because we are such a disadvantage to Virginia in particular. The new governor is going to have to deal with that issue and find ways to help reduce that burden to help make us more competitive. The second serious disadvantage is that in Montgomery County, our county government has lost its focus on customer service. Permitting services doesn't work. Mr. Leggett talked about that in the State of the County speech last year. Permitting services worked fine when I left. They broke it. Current county leaders broke it in the last 7 years. We need to get the county government working properly, working for the people, working and focused on customer service. And the biggest example of that is the Silver Spring Transit Center. I mean, the whole community, not just the business community, looks at it and says, county government can't build this transit center. And yesterday, I just asked for some answers to some simple questions from our county executive and county council. When's it going to open? It's 2.5 years late, tens of millions of dollars over budget. When's it going to open? What's the detailed plan to fix it? What's it going to cost? And is it going to be safe when it opens? And we're still waiting to get answers from them on that. They've had the report for a year. They've been studying this for a year. It's time for answers for the people of this county to show that we can get things done here.
Mr. Leggett, your opportunity to respond.
I find Mr. Duncan's last remark somewhat interesting. Let me read something for you. I'm very pleased to join the distinguished group of federal, state, and local officials to kick off National Tri-Transit Week here in Silver Spring. The centerpiece of our redevelopment effort is the Silver Spring Transit Project. When both phases of the new Silver Spring Transit Center are completed in 2003, we'll be ensuring that Silver Spring will have adequate bus capacity to handle growth without overcrowding the roads. This is Doug Duncan in 2000. Later, Silver Spring was the county's first transit management district and will be the home to a new transit center that will open in 2005. This is Doug Duncan in 2002. We'll expand bus service moving forward to Silver Springs Transit Center. This is Doug Duncan in 2005. He had 6.5 years to build the center and never did. Now he stands before you after I've come in after him, got the money in the height of the recession, built it to 95% completion, have a contractual problem which we are addressing, and to point a finger. This is the record. This was not done for 7 years on his watch, and stands here now and to complain when I am building it in a recession and going through the process of making the appropriate change. I would not open it until it is appropriate and safe to do so.
Mr. Leggett went a little bit long on that. Mr. Duncan, would you like to take 30 seconds to respond?
This is Doug Duncan in 2014. When's it going to open? What's it going to cost? What's the detailed plan to fix it? And is it going to be safe? Okay. Simple questions that they should be able to answer right away, which he didn't touch at all because he doesn't have the answers, because he's been studying this issue for a year. Do you need another year to study it, Ike? How much longer are you going to take studying this? They're frozen by indecision, and people in Silver Spring are greatly inconvenienced by this, and it has really hurt the revitalization of Silver Spring because this albatross has been there for so many years, boarded up.
Mr. Andrews, you have 30 seconds too.
Thanks. Well, Mr. Duncan, Mr. Leggett, arguing about who didn't finish it, the truth is neither one finished it, and I don't know why you would elect one of them to finish it. I think you'd be better off trying a different approach.
Thank you. We will move on to another topic. Mr. Andrews, you get the next question. Many municipal jurisdictions across the country are facing significant underfunding of public pension obligations. Do you believe that the present funding levels in Montgomery County are adequate to meet pension obligations for current employees? And do you feel that the current packages for future employees should be reconsidered or revised, particularly in light of the increasing disappearance of the fixed pension plans in the private sector? And in asking that question, I include not only county employees, but also county school employees who, as you know, thanks to a 2012 law, are increasingly the responsibility of the county.
Well, this is a huge concern because in 2012, the state legislature and most of our state senators and delegates from Montgomery County voted to shift teacher pension costs to the counties. which hurts our county more than any other county because we have more teachers on average that make more than teachers in other counties. That bill is going to be $60 million annually by 2017, and it's going to come off the top of the budget, just like debt service, and squeeze things out of the budget and drive taxes up unless we provide compensating cuts or get the law changed in Annapolis. So that's a huge concern. We've now been handed a cost we don't control because the county doesn't set teacher salaries, the school board does. We don't invest in pension funds. We don't set the pension benefits, but we're being sent the bill. I have consistently worked to keep the cost of salaries and benefits reasonable. I mentioned in 2005, Mr. Duncan proposed 20-year retirement for career firefighters. I was the only one that stood up and said, we shouldn't do that. Firefighters can retire before the age of 40 because of that. Now, even if they don't, the whole cost of the system is now 5 years more expensive for every level of retirement. We didn't need to do that. In 2009, Mr. Leggett sent over a provision to pay pensions as if we hadn't canceled a pay raise. But how could we afford to pay pensions if we can't afford the pay raise they're based on? I stood up, led the effort that repealed that in 2010. That saved us $280 million over 40 years. I have the record of making those tough decisions when no one else is. And I do agree that we have to be very careful about taking on additional pension obligations because they do drive it. We don't control the school pensions, obviously. We need to be much better in Annapolis to control that, because if we don't unite our delegation to fight for us, then our taxes will have increasing pressure here. That's one of the reasons taxes are high in Montgomery County, because we don't get our fair share back from Annapolis, but we also have to control our own policies that drive those taxes as well. And I will do that. I don't take any campaign funds from the people the county executive negotiates with. My opponents do.
Mr. Duncan. You know, I love hearing about how well we're not doing Annapolis from my two opponents when the last 7 years they sat back and let Annapolis take us for granted. The governor promised $55 million for school construction to this county in exchange for support for gambling, in exchange for support for tax increases. Our county leaders bragged about that, and then when the time came to pay up, the governor gave us $46 million. And instead of saying, no, that's not enough, give us what you promised, they said, thank you very much, you're very generous. From that point on, that was in 2008, from that point on, the state of Maryland took us for granted. Last session, in terms of school construction, the state of Maryland passed something to give Baltimore City $600 million extra for school construction. $600 million, a commitment from the state. The same session, Prince George's County got $200 million for a regional hospital. Montgomery County got a gas tax increase. We knew we were in a school construction crisis, and our leaders did nothing. Now that it's election year, they're down in Annapolis holding rallies when they should have been working on this for the last 7 years, when they should have been negotiating, holding the line, holding the governor to his promises, and making sure that we get back our fair share from Annapolis. Mr. Leggett.
Right. When we look at our fair share, I think if you look at the record would show that for the last 7 years, we did as well or better than they did in the previous several years from the prior administration from Annapolis. Secondly, you cannot solve the challenges in school construction in the state of Maryland without first solving the challenges in Baltimore City. And to assume that you could do that by snapping your finger and challenging the governor is a huge mistake. Number one, if you look at the top 50 schools in the state in terms of their challenges that they have, the top 50, 47 of them are in Baltimore City. 47. We as a state cannot address the other concerns about construction unless we first address those top 50. 47 out of 50. And so, yes, we've been fighting this battle for the last 5 years, not just in the last election, but it became very clear in the last year or two that you cannot get that resolved unless you first resolve the challenges in Baltimore. And so I, along with others, decided we were going to resolve that challenge first, and therefore we were coming back to look at what we're doing now. And I think that is a stronger case for us to make. We could have gotten in line before, and we were, but that line was going nowhere unless we dealt with the top 50 schools in this state. That's the political reality that we face. And no amount of political possibility is going to change that. There's a real challenge and a real desire to change it, and I think that we're on the right path.
Mr. Andrews, you have the last word, 60 seconds.
We simply have to strengthen our effectiveness in Annapolis if we're going to avoid this type of thing in the future. We have been handed two measures, the pension shift and the maintenance of effort law, that straitjacket the county and drive up our costs. And we must unite our delegation so that they are fighting for us together. Only one member of our state delegation from Montgomery County stood up and voted against that extreme maintenance of effort law. That was Senator Brian Frosch, and good for him, and he's running for Attorney General. But he was the only one. In terms of the pension shift, most of our senators and delegates voted for that too. We have to be in their districts. We have to be in their neighborhoods. Not in their face, we have to be in their neighborhoods so that they feel accountable to the people they represent, the people they elect. They feel accountable more, I think, to some of the interest groups that lobby them and to the legislative leaders that appoint them. And we need to change that balance if we're going to change our success in Annapolis, which very much affects our ability to sustain our pension costs, because if we don't get what we need from Annapolis, then our pension costs and taxes will go up.
Thank you. Next question for Mr. Duncan. In light of the decrease in the median income in the county in recent years and the resulting impact on the tax base, do county residents need to be prepared in the near term for very limited growth or perhaps even reductions in services provided by county government? And also, given the county's recent demographic shift to a majority-minority population, what changes will this necessitate in the current allocation of services to the county's residents?
Well, we've been going through a period of tax increases, service cuts in this county, and frankly, the state of Maryland's balanced their budget by raising taxes and passing costs on to us, which our county leaders have let happen. I believe in growing the economy. To me, the best social program is a jobs program. We've got to find ways to get jobs growing again in Montgomery County. We've got to find ways to grow our tax base. And we are in a jobless recovery right now. Since 2007, Montgomery County has added 11,000 jobs. Fairfax County has added 40,000. D.C. has added 30,000. Anne Arundel, Baltimore County, even Howard County have added more jobs than we have since 2007. We're in a jobs recovery, and it's because we have not put a priority in economic development until 2013, when our county leaders declared that Montgomery County is now open for business. The recession started in what, 2008? 5 years later, we're now open for business. That's wrong. We are now pulling away from the biotech community by evicting 38 startup companies out of the biotech incubator, and we're saying cyber is more important to us than bio. We can do both. We're in Montgomery County. We can and we should do both. We shouldn't be telling the global life sciences community that Montgomery County is not interested in biotech startups. We need to get back to being a leader in the startup economy, attracting people here who want to start companies, grow jobs, and be successes here in Montgomery County, and you have to make that a priority.
Mr. Leggett.
I think the last time I checked, Montgomery County's unemployment was the lowest in the state, and our job growth was the highest in the region from 2010 to 2013. That's not enough, and we should do better. We talk about economic development. The 100,000 jobs that we are talking about in White Flint, Shaded Road, the Science Quarter in Great Seneca, and White Oak, 100,000. That is more than any period of time that we've developed in the history of this county for such a short period of time. That's a significant amount. And so to assume that there's not been movement on those things, I think is wrong. We are looking at the potential here with our transportation needs. We could not move forward until we first solved that. Now, how do we solve it? You go back and talk about the transportation, it goes back to the funds in the Transportation Trust Fund that now allows us to do so many different things. In Wheaton, in Silver Spring, in White Oak, Great Seneca. Those are the things that are going to produce the jobs that we want. Until you do that, and this is what this plan does, and this is what we're moving forward on.
Mr. Andrews.
We must have a strong and vibrant economy if we're going to have the tax base that we want and need to fund the services that Montgomery County residents expect, whether it is our schools, whether it is our excellent public safety services, whether it's vital health and human services, our safety net, or protecting the environment. So we've got to have a vibrant economy to do that. The county needs to do its part to make that happen. We don't control the market, but we do control tax rates. We set the property tax rate. The county council and county executive, other than myself, support raising the property tax rate the past 3 years. The energy tax rate, as I mentioned before, highest in the region. We need to bring it down so it's more competitive. These are things we can actually control, and that's what we need to focus on in order to do that. We also have to be careful about leaving out the great majority of businesses. You know, when you raise tax rates and then you give tax credits back to a few companies, you're not creating a level playing field. You're raising the taxes on 98% of the businesses in the county and giving tax breaks to 2%. I want to create a generally hospitable, generally friendly business climate that's fair to everybody.
Mr. Duncan, the last word.
Yeah, let's talk unemployment for a second. We all got the e-blasts from our county leaders touting the drop in the unemployment rate in the county from 4.5 to 4.1%. And I'm sure, and touting that we've added 18,000 jobs since 2011 in this county. And I'm sure we all felt good about that. But if you look at how that happened, we didn't add any jobs when the unemployment rate dropped. We actually lost over 1,200 jobs that month. So how can the unemployment rate drop when you're losing jobs? Well, it dropped because over 3,000 people stopped looking for work because they were so frustrated with the economic prospects in this county. That's why the unemployment rate went down. And when you look at the number of jobs grown between 11 and 13, Anne Arundel County, Baltimore County, D.C., even Prince George's County have added more jobs than we have here in Montgomery County. Economic development's not been a priority. We need to make the innovation economy the centerpiece as we move forward.
Before we go on, one slight housekeeping notice, and it's been brought to my attention, there's a reverberation in the sound system. I'm told it's because cell phones may be on. I have just turned mine off. If anybody is one on, if you could turn them off, it would be appreciated. Thank you.
Nobody's calling me.
It's a bad buzz. If you turn them off, if you've got one, you can turn them off. It is a bad buzz.
Yeah.
It sounds like very bad on the radio.
Give everybody a chance. Yeah, we can give everybody a chance to turn off their iPhones, smartphones, cell phones.
Now they're really not calling me.
Okay, next question is for Mr. Leggett. Mr. Leggett, you have asserted your predecessor, Mr. Duncan, placed the county on, and I quote, an unsustainable, unquote, path in terms of spending. Mr. Duncan has responded that when he left office, the county had several $100 million in reserves and enjoyed a high bond rating. Can you elaborate on how you believe Mr. Duncan left the county with a path of spending growth that was unsustainable?
Yes. If you go back and look at his last budget, you'll see that the reserves there were reduced by well over $100 million. You take the end of the year's balance, you combine that with income and expenses. Income and expenses well exceeded that number. Now, you could do the math and say that technically the county is not broke by assuming that you're going to draw down every penny in your reserve. But keep in mind the reserves that we have in Montgomery County is like an escrow account. In the height of what we consider to be a growing economy, whereby you increased in the last year 14% of tax-supported spending, you've drawn down over $100 million out of your reserve, and you look at that balance, to me, you're broke. Now, you can technically say that no, you're not, because you have a few dollars remaining in the standard reserve for which all county executives must keep to some degree. To me, you're broke. You could spend that in many different ways, but when you're taking in more expenses than the revenues that you have, and at the end of the day, the end of that year, you still have more debt than the revenue can cover, you're broke. That's my analysis. And you could go back and look at the numbers that we could provide for you.
Mr. Andrews.
Well, I've served for 15 years now, almost 16 on the county council. I'm the only person in the world, actually, who served 8 years with each of these gentlemen, so I think I can talk about their records in a way that can contrast them. But on this issue, actually, they're more alike in terms of different. And if you look at the labor contracts that each of them has sent over time, they've been very similar. In 2005, Mr. Duncan sent over a proposal for 20-year retirement for firefighters. I stood up and said, no, that we shouldn't do that. It's too expensive. In 2008, right before the recession, Mr. Leggett sent over 3 labor contracts, one that included a 10.5% pay increase in the 3rd year, and another that increased maximum pension benefits by 13% for police officers, another that increased by 33%, the contribution that the county would make to defined contribution retirement plans. I was the only one that said, you know, we don't need to do that, we shouldn't do that. Of course, 6 months later, those had to be canceled. The pay raises were all canceled. I served as council president in 2009. It was the first time we spent less on county government than the year before in 15 years, but we got through it by not raising tax rates, by not laying people off, by canceling the pay increase, and not cutting deeply into essential services. So I have stood up and been a leader on this. My two colleagues up here have been much more similar to each other.
Mr. Duncan.
Yeah, I think that the real quote from Ike was that the county was broke and getting broker when I left office. And it's just laughable. It's laughable. 12 years of balanced budgets, 12 years of AAA bond ratings from all of the rating agencies. Rating agencies talked about the excellent fiscal management of the county, which is leading to excellent fiscal and financial conditions for our community. At the end of the year of my last budget, the county had over $300 million in reserves. Mr. Leggett increased the budget when he came into office with his first budget. So if we were broke, why are you spending more money? He took my finance director, who, if you think about it, if we're broke, the finance director is one of the architects of that bankruptcy. He didn't fire him. He promoted him. He made him his chief administrative officer. So we weren't broke. But the important thing is, this election isn't about budgets 10 or 20 years ago, or 30 years ago. This election is about the next 10, 20, 30 years. Who's going to lead us? Who's going to promote improvement in our schools? Who's going to promote more dollars from Annapolis? Who's going to promote better jobs and more jobs to the people of this county? That's what I'm going to do. I'm looking to the future of what we need to do to make this a better community, to make sure that our future is as bright as our past has been.
The county today stands with the highest financial reserves in the history of the county. Let me repeat that. The highest financial reserves in the history of the county, following a great recession. Yeah, we were broke. You could spend it any way you want to. You were taking in less money than you had. Now, going back to the question about the labor unions, let me take you back just a moment. We provided no COLAs for 4 years, no seniority pay for 4 years. We eliminated 10% of the workforce. We reduced health payments by the county, reduced retirement contributions by the county. I even sued our labor unions because I walked away from a collective bargaining agreement. No county executive in the history of the state of Maryland has done as much as more as it relates to cost than I have. None. Some people have done some of these things, some have done others. I have done them all and for a long period of time. So to assume, for the sake of the argument, that the records are similar is simply not the case. Look at the record for yourself and you see that there is no similarity between myself and Mr. Duncan as it relates to these things. No county executive in the history of the state of Maryland has done that. You stand with the highest financial reserves in the history of the state, history of Montgomery County. That's a fact.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. Andrews. We've been touching on the school construction issue. I'd like to get back to that in along a somewhat different angle. Montgomery County, along with other jurisdictions, as you know, is currently advocating a plan before the legislature that calls for state assistance for local school construction. If state aid is made available this year, a prospect many consider unlikely, it would leverage about $750 million in bonds to finance new school construction over the next 5 years. At a time when the school population is increasing at a rate of 2,000 students per year, school superintendent Starr has proposed a capital budget of more than $1.5 billion over the next 6 years for school construction, and has suggested that as much as $2.2 billion will be necessary to meet school construction needs during that period. Number one, I wanted to see whether you agree with Superintendent Starr's estimates of the need for school construction in the coming years, and if so, where do you see the county finding the funding for this kind of level of construction, even if state assistance is forthcoming this year?
Well, the reason that we are in such a box at this point is that we have been underfunded by the state for school construction funds now for year after year after year. If you look at the numbers, if you look at the state construction pie for school construction, Montgomery County has averaged about 11 to 12% the last 15 years. We should be getting 17% because that's the percentage of students that Montgomery County Public Schools educates. Had we gotten our fair share just in the last 10 years, and this goes back before Mr. Leggett as well, then we would have received $135 million more in that period for our schools. That's a sizable amount of money. That would build several schools, provide renovations at many others. We need to make sure that we get our fair share there, because what happens in Annapolis on this bond issue is still unclear, but it's not looking highly likely at this point. But what is likely is that they're going to keep funding, they're going to keep allocating school construction dollars from this pie that's been there for years, and that's what we're losing at. And so we have to keep our eye on the ball, and that's the money that's there now. That's the money we're losing out on. In terms of Mr. Starr's request, the Board of Education does a very good job in prioritizing school construction projects. I've served on the Education Committee for 7 years now. We have funded them in accordance with their priorities, and as much as we can each year, and the school system gets a lion's share both of our construction dollars and of our operating budget, and we supplement it in many other ways as well. So I believe that this county has shown its commitment over and over again to public education. And public education is broader than our schools, I will say as well. It also includes Montgomery College. It also includes the University of Shady Grove. It includes our library system. And I want to make sure we have enough money for those too.
Mr. Duncan.
Yeah, we're not going to be able to meet our school construction needs without more aid from the state of Maryland. And what's happened over the last 7 years is that the current county leadership has let the state of Maryland take us for granted, not give us the dollars we deserve because of missed opportunities from our county leaders. And I talked earlier about the governor's promise of $55 million and thanking him for something less. We just heard a very eloquent defense or statement from Mr. Leggett about why he was so passionate about advocating for the needs of the Baltimore City school children and why they needed school construction dollars above everyone else in the state. Well, here's what happens in Annapolis. Every few years, it's like clockwork, every few years there is a package of aid from the state targeted to Baltimore City. And what you do is you say, yeah, Baltimore City's got needs, we understand that, but every jurisdiction in the state has similar needs. And therefore we need a statewide package, and you fight for that. And that's what we didn't do. He was there fighting for the children of Baltimore and not fighting for the children of Montgomery County and our school construction needs. That's a real problem. That's a real problem when the county executive of Montgomery County isn't looking out for the interests of Montgomery County in Annapolis.
Mr. Leggett.
Well, I find that very interesting, that if I'm standing up for poor kids in the city of Baltimore, there's something wrong with it. I find it interesting that we have similar kids in Silver Spring, East County, and other parts of our county. That's the right thing to do. I've stood long and hard for the children of Montgomery County, and to assume that you would not do so as a county executive, I find somewhat offensive, though. I have been in this community for many, many years, and I don't think that you could find anyone who would not say that I have not stood up for the people of this county, and I've done so. But for the kids in Baltimore City, when you're looking at the condition of those schools, and to assume that the state would act on Montgomery County's needs first, and to make the argument that our schools are the same, to the members of the delegations in Annapolis, they would find that laughable. You'll be laughed out of the room to come to say that our conditions are similar to Baltimore. They are not. They are not. And that argument would not fly. That is no longer an argument that would fly in this state and with delegates and senators around this state, because they know what the conditions are. And so let's face the fact. We had to deal with that before we could deal with the rest of it. I understood that, the state understood that, and the leaders understood that. And if you're going to assume that simply that you could go there, snap your finger, and say those needs are the same, you will literally be laughed out of the room.
Mr. Andrews, final word.
Yeah, I want to add another component to this debate about school funding, because part of it is also county policies on growth and development of taxes. In 2009 or 2010, one of those springs, we had a proposal before us that would have raised the threshold for requiring developers to pay a school facility payment. It would have raised the threshold from 105% of capacity to 110% of capacity. That was a 5-4 vote on the county council. I was one of the 5 to reject that change because that would have contributed overcrowding and reduced the resources that we had. So we can do some things here, and we have been generous in funding the school system. But at the state level, not only are we not getting our fair share in terms of school construction funding, we only get 20 cents back on our tax dollar overall. Now, I know we're never going to get back as much as Baltimore City. We all know that, and that's just the reality. But we get less back than Howard County. Howard County gets 26 cents back on their tax dollars as of about a year ago, 26% of their dollars. We get 20%. That's not enough.
Thank you. Mr. Duncan, next question. Transportation infrastructure is seen as is key to further development in the county, another element increasing the county's tax base. Do you favor building the proposed bus rapid transit system, and what other moves are needed to improve the county's transportation infrastructure? I would also add to that question the fact that I know earlier in your career you expressed some reservations about the Purple Line. Do you support the Purple Line now? And are you prepared to provide whatever money the county would have to provide for that project?
In terms of transportation congestion, we need an all-the-above approach. We need more of everything, more road capacity, more transit, more hiker-biker lanes. And I think everything we can do to add to that is going to help us. So in terms of the Purple Line, I supported earlier on. I really was the person in the region who popularized the phrase Purple Line and talked about a subway beltway connecting the suburban job centers. I favored something going out beyond the beltway, outside the beltway, closer to the county's growth centers. And I lost that debate. So the county picked and the state picked an alignment, and I'm fully supportive of that. And I'm very pleased that President Obama has put $100 million in his federal budget with the prospect of hopefully getting up to $900 million total for us for the Purple Line. The BRT, supportive of parts of that. I think we need to be very careful when we start talking about eliminating current lanes now, but certainly dedicated lanes for BRT is something that needs to be done. The CCT needs to go all the way up to Clarksburg. It shouldn't just stop at the Science Center. It needs to go to where the residents are to help them get down. And I think we should start, in terms of the BRT, we should start with the Rockville Pipe plan to show people what it's going to look like, how it's going to work, how it's going to function. And I think that would be a good way to get this started. And we've got a lot of private sector investment in that. And let's not forget bike lanes. We need to find a way to build out sort of the county's master plan for bikes, to create sort of dedicated bike lanes and other ways for people to get around that way, particularly as we're attracting more young people to live in the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Leggett.
The Purple Line, the Carter City Transit, the vehicle rapid transit system, on paper they look good, but we need to move them from paper to reality. And the reality, until we receive the resources that we fought for, gasoline tax and others, it was not possible. I led that fight. I brought together the county executive from Prince George's County, the mayor of Baltimore City, to go to Annapolis when their delegates and senators were reluctant to do so, to push to get the resources to make all of this happen. And when the governor and others stood before you right downstairs this past summer to talk about the finances that we have, they called out one person. Ike Leggett was the person who led this charge and advocated for this for years and years, and he was right. I called for this when I was running as a candidate for office. And people said it was foolish for a county executive to call for a gasoline tax increase while running for office. I said at that point in time we needed it, that our economic future in the state of Maryland depended upon our ability to go forward. And as a result of that, all of these transit projects that we're talking about today are now in a position to be realized because of the funds that we have. I led that fight. In addition to that fight, look at the resources that we provided for our own roads. I have increased by 680% over and above the level that we had in the previous administration for our roads in Montgomery County. They were in deplorable conditions. We are fighting back to restore that today.
Mr. Andrews.
Well, the underlying concern here is traffic and the bottleneck it creates and how that can impact not only economic development but people's quality of life. There's nothing more frustrating than not knowing if you're going to get somewhere and sitting in traffic for an hour and a half. So we do need to do a lot of things. I have long supported the Purple Line, always supported it on the current route, and also the Quarter Cities Transit Way, which is a critical transit project for the up-county between Clarksburg and the Shady Grove Metro. I've also been a strong supporter of increasing bicycle and pedestrian access and safety, and I wrote the county law that said when we build a capital project or we renovate one, we've got to look at how it affects pedestrians and bicyclists too. because we are seeing a sizable increase in the number of people that are walking and biking to work, especially biking in the down county, as I've been out knocking on doors. Second, we need to make sure that our road capacity is used to its full capacity. And there is one highway in this county, I'm sure you can think of it, that is highly underused, the Intercounty Connector, a $3 billion highway that has extremely high tolls, which keeps people off of it. It's not a bridge or a tunnel. The tolls have to be lower to attract people to use it. Our gubernatorial candidates need to address that because they can appoint the people that set the tolls.
Mr. Duncan, last word.
Yeah, I would just say, Ike, of course the governor is going to single you out when they talk about the gas tax increase. And of course the mayor of Baltimore is going to support your efforts. And of course the Prince George's County Executive is going to support your efforts. Because they got all their transportation improvements, plus Baltimore City got $600 million for school construction. Prince George's County got $200 million for the regional hospital. And we got the gas tax. That's not leadership, that's wrong. Montgomery County got played in Annapolis that session. And no wonder they were so eager to praise you, because they got away with not giving Montgomery County a lot of money to help us with our school construction.
Next question is for Mr. Leggett, and it sort of follows on to something Mr. Duncan just said. Both of your opponents have raised the issue that the county currently receives about 20 cents back from the state for every dollar it sends to Annapolis. Are you at all optimistic that this ratio can be improved in the coming years? And if so, what steps need to be taken to ensure the county gets its, quote, fair share?
No, no one is pleased with that, but I think if you look around virtually every jurisdiction around the country, you'll find that more urban and more wealthy areas are fighting the same battle. This is not something that is new. This is something that has gone on for the last 25 or 30 years. We were making the same arguments 20 years ago about the lack of funding for Montgomery County 25 years ago. So that has not changed substantially. So that's not a new issue. So we continue to fight that fight. But also, let's be clear about this fight in terms of the dollars, because when you go back and look at it, for example, it does not include all dollars in terms of capital expenditure. Dollars that we're looking at now for the Purple Line, dollars we're looking at now as it relates to the ICC, construction dollars that go into that mix. You're basically talking about the operating dollars here. But if you look at the capital dollars, it's a little bit better. But even so, when you add that mix together, I am not satisfied. But it requires cooperation and working with all of those legislators around. It's not the Montgomery County delegates and senators we have the problem. It is the problem of all delegates and senators around the state. And this is what I've been working on. I'm the incoming president of the Maryland Association of Counties, working with those counties, trying to find ways in which we can carry our message in Montgomery County across the state in a way that we can bring together delegates and senators that may agree with us on some of these crucial issues. That's the way forward, because unless you have that level of support, you're not likely to change these formulas, because much of the formulas are written, and they're written in a way that requires the wealth base of our county that works against us.
Mr. Andrews.
Montgomery County has been shorted in Annapolis for a long, long time. My two opponents have been in office for a long, long time, 20 years. It's time for a different approach. The current approach is not working to get our fair share from Annapolis. The first thing that we need to do is to unite our own senators and delegates behind this effort. When so many of them voted to shift pension costs, when all but one voted to shift a burden, an extreme maintenance of effort law to us, we got problems in our own area that we have to solve first before we can go to the other counties and say, we need your help. We have to unite our own delegation. And that involves mobilizing the public. You're mobilized, you're here. We need to have lots of other people in Montgomery County that are working to ensure that our own state senators and delegates are fighting as one. And the county executive is the person that needs to lead that effort and call out our senators and delegates when they don't do that. I did that last year. I've done that over time. I've been very blunt. I like our senators and delegates as people. They're good people, but they are not often fighting for us in a way that's effective. And they're too responsive to what their legislative leaders want them to do, and they're too responsive when they get a call from an interest group. We've got to change that balance. We've got to mobilize the public to do it.
Mr. Duncan.
Yeah, as I've said repeatedly today, Annapolis takes us for granted because of the lack of leadership from our current county leaders, both county executive and county council. And if you look at the shift in teacher pension costs, if you look at the taking of highway user revenue, I think that'll add up
if not now, eventually to about $100 million a year in lost state aid that we're not going to get to this community. That's $1 billion every 10 years. That's a lot of money. And then when you look at the state dollars that we're getting now, frankly, if it wasn't for my efforts with then Senator Chris Van Hollen, Senator Ida Rubin, then now Senator, then County Analyst Rich Madaleno, the Thornton Commission would have come in with funding recommendations to schools that would really have been a problem for Montgomery County. We used our county delegation to say, no, we're not voting for this bill unless we get what we want. The bill lost in committee. Senator Hoffman, the chair of the Senate Budget Tax Committee, pointed at me and said, come back with me, with Senator Van Hollen, with Senator Rubin, and we worked out the deal to benefit Montgomery County. The increase in funding from the state that we've seen has been a result of those changes in the Thornton Commission recommendations, which I led. And when they start talking about Thornton 2, let's rewrite the education formula again, which they're going to do shortly. Who do you want down there fighting for you? Me or the two people who let the state take $100 million a year from us?
Mr. Leggett, last word.
By the way, Senator Van Hollen and both Ida Rubin endorsed Ike Leggett for county executive. You talk as though the challenges that we face are Montgomery County challenges. The issues that you've talked about are issues that affected the entire state of Maryland. So if you look at this, it is not simply a Montgomery County problem. It is a statewide problem as it relates to the change in the laws that you've just described. We are hit just as well as many others across the state. Why is that the case? It is the case because we have been in the midst of a major recession. That recession just didn't hit Montgomery County. It hit the state as well. The state must balance its budget and have only two ways to do it. Either increase taxes or reduce aid to the local communities. Everybody across the state was reduced as a result of that. So be real about the problems and the challenges. The state had to cut its budget. There are only two ways to do it to balance that budget. Increase revenue by the state, meaning taxes that hits us as well, or reduce state aid. They chose a combination of both. Everybody across the state was hit as a result of that.
Gentlemen, at the risk of sounding like one of the meteorologists talking about the never-ending winter, there is light at the end of the tunnel. I'm now going to pose a question to each of you, which will each, same question we pose to each of you. You'll each have 2 minutes to respond, and after that we'll go to your closing statements. Statement to each of you. Mr. Andrews, you go first. Throughout your entire government career, what is your proudest accomplishment and why? And by the same token, what is your biggest failure and how would you have done it better in hindsight?
Well, as council president in 2009, I was faced with a very difficult situation. The national economy was shredding jobs. 500,000 jobs were being lost every month. Our revenues were plummeting. Our unemployment rate doubled within a few months, and we had to deal with it. And I led the effort on the council that produced a budget that balanced our budget in a way that didn't cut into the bone of essential services, that avoided laying employees off, which would have been a very difficult thing to do for them and for their communities. And we didn't raise tax rates, and we did all that by making judicious cuts to services and by canceling a pay raise we couldn't afford that was $125 million. So that was a major effort to do that. I've also been a leader on many of the laws that you know the county for. I spent 3 years fighting and getting the living wage law through the council. That was a huge effort. I led the effort in 2003 that produced the smoke-free restaurant law. I was the sponsor of that. I led the effort that reformed our disability retirement system. We had 60% of police officers retiring on disability. I led the multi-year effort to change that. That is now done. I wrote the law that expanded our employment opportunities for people with disabilities, because we want to be a model employer for them. And I just introduced legislation that's sponsored by all of my colleagues in the council to change the way we finance campaigns in the county so that we have public financing options for candidates to reduce the influence of big money and bring more people in. In terms of what I would have done differently, the first living wage law I introduced back in 1999 didn't make it. I learned something from that. I learned you need to really do more groundwork and outreach into the community when you're putting something like that together. And so for the next 3 years, that's what I did, and we got it through 3 years later.
Mr. Duncan.
Yeah, I would say the thing I'm most proud of is that I broke the paralysis by analysis stranglehold that had taken over this county. You know, we perfected the phrase paralysis by analysis here in the county. We love to study things, we love to debate things, we love to wait for the perfect solution, but we don't get anything done. And when I came into office, there was the Travilla dump fire, which had been burning for 2 months. Our county leaders talked about it for 2 months and let it burn. We had to close the school periodically because of the smoke coming from there. The neighborhood was in a state of panic over what they were inhaling because we didn't know what was in the dump. And I came in office and said, put the fire out. And they projected the fire was going to burn. It started in October. It was going to burn. It was still burning in December when I took office. It was going to burn until March. We had it out within a week. And that was a great way to tell the people, we're going to do things differently here. We're going to debate, we're going to analyze, we're going to study, we're going to talk to people, we're going to get input, but we're going to make a decision, the best decision we can, then we're going to move on. And right now we are stuck in that paralysis by analysis in terms of the Silver Spring Transit Center and so many other issues facing it, where we find ourselves fighting for the interest of another jurisdiction versus fighting for our own children. And I will say the biggest failure, this is more of a personal failure, is my inability to diagnose that I was suffering from depression. I lived through 2 years of hell, and I come from a family with a history of mental illness. My grandfather was put in St. Elizabeth's in 1932, something like that, till he died in 1955 with bipolar, with manic depression back then. My father struggled with that for his whole adult life. Some of my brothers and sisters suffer from mental illness. And here I am with this whole family history, and I'm just getting worse and worse and worse, and couldn't figure out what it was, till frankly it hit me in church, in Mass one day. It hit me, I was depressed. Then I saw, I'm getting the X, I saw a psychiatrist right away, was diagnosed with major depression, got treatment, and got better. And I encourage everyone else to get treatment and get better as well. Thank you.
Mr. Leggett?
I think we continue to rewrite history here. This is a statement from County Executive Duncan in May 16, 1995. These past 3 days, I have been frustrated with the period with the residents of North Potomac, community firefighters, announcing that the fire is not out. This is 5 months later from the time you just indicated that you indicated it should be done, it was done. This is 6 months later here, that was not, and you called in the press conference to announce that it is not, and you're frustrated as a result of it. So you did a good job of addressing it, but it was not done as quickly and as automatically as you indicated it was. It took 6 months to get this fire out. The most challenging thing that I think, and the most proud thing that I'm proud of, is placing the county in a sustainable position in terms of our budgets. We are in a much better position today. To stand before you to say that we have budgets today that are sustainable, and we have the highest financial reserves in the history of the county, coming out of a major recession, government closure, sequesters, is a major, major accomplishment. Let me go back because I want to also indicate another piece of history. Phil indicated that he was the person responsible for the smoking ban. That's not quite correct. I started this myself singly, one vote. The first vote was mine. The next year, there were 2 votes, myself and Neil Potter. 2 years later, I brought the coalition together that included Phil. There were 5 votes that passed it. We only got 5 votes. We only got 5. Doug Duncan then vetoed it. And we could not override his veto to outlaw smoking in the smoke-free restaurant. I then passed it as a health regulation, and it was challenged later in court in reverse. After I left the council, when there were clearly 6 votes, including Steve Silverman, Mike Sub, and others, who I lobbied to support this, Phil then introduced it again, and it was passed, but it was clear that it passed at that time. But I led the fight, took the initiative for it, fought it, was criticized for it, was reversed by Duncan, vetoed, and then passed it again as a health regulation. So if there's any person you need to thank for, it's myself and others who led that fight initially to get the smoke ban in Montgomery County.
Mr. Leggett, I'm going to extend for 30 seconds to address the other part of the question, which is your biggest failure or regret and how you would have done it better, and I'll open it up to the other gentleman for the 30 seconds
I think
as well.
the failure is when we look at the county today, there is not a recognition, a full appreciation of the suffering of so many in our county at the lower margins. We are an affluent county, Montgomery County, but there are great needs out here. And I and many others over the years have not been able to resolve that. We see too many people who are homeless, too many people who need shelter, too many people who need support. That failure, I think, is a blight on all of us. And I would hope that at some point in time, a county such as Montgomery County that can do a great deal can ultimately resolve that problem.
Mr. Duncan, another 30 seconds if you'd like. Okay, Mr. Andrews?
fine.
Okay, good. Okay, it's time.
That was the 2-minute.
Yes, that was
Question.
that was 2 minutes. And since Mr. Leggett went a little bit longer, I gave each of you 30
Well, I
seconds.
ceded my time to.
Okay. Sure. Closing statements. Since we started with Mr. Andrews, we'll start with Mr. Leggett and go in the reverse order.
Let me just say that I'm very proud to be your county executive. I've worked hard in this county for a number of years, and I don't come to this position lightly and decide to run out of light decision. I've served this county in many ways and served our community. I first started as a civil rights advocate, as a student leader back in the 60s. I served as an Army captain in Vietnam. I've served as a government attorney, a staff person working on the Hill. I served our county as the head of the county's Human Rights Commission here in Montgomery County. And I've served on a number of boards and commissions. I served for 4 terms as county council member, 3 times as council president, chair of the Maryland State Democratic Party, a White House fellow, council member, president of the National Association of County Executives, incoming president of the Maryland Association of Counties, and your county executive. I say all of this to say to you that this is a job that I want because I love Montgomery County. And I think that we have done an excellent job in some of the best, worst situations that you could find to bring us to this point now that we could be talking about expansions, talk about business development, increase in transportation options, and all the many things that we talked about here today. I love Montgomery County. I love this place because it is a place that I think is one of the best in America for all of us. And I think that leadership, that history, and that legacy of accomplishment is something that we should value and something we should look forward to as we go forward. I ask for your support. I think that we've done a great job, but we can do better because this is about the future, about taking those transportation options and making Montgomery County better, taking those jobs and increasing our chances for support in education and making this great county better. I ask for your support, and thank you so very much for coming out today.
Mr. Duncan.
This is a great county, and there are so many wonderful things here. We really have a great quality of life here, but we are facing some critical challenges. I think one of the key things that has made Montgomery County such a great county is our ability to look long-term, to look to the future, to have a vision for where we need to go. And my vision for this county is that we should be a center of excellence in everything that we do. Our schools, our economy, our environment, our transportation network. We got a lot of work to do there. But everything we do, we should strive to be a center of excellence. Our county services should be excellent services, getting good value for the tax dollar to the people of this county. And with the challenges facing us, we need a hands-on county executive. We need stronger leadership that's able to get things done in this county. We need stronger leadership to fight for our interests in Annapolis. And we need a county executive with the right vision for our future. And I will just close with, and I'm surprised Ike didn't say this, but the biggest failure in the county right now is the Silver Spring Transit Center. And I will ask once again, the county executive and county council, when's it going to open? What's the detailed plan to fix it? How much is it going to cost? And is it going to be safe? Simple questions deserve simple answers. They've had the report for a year detailing the problems. When are we going to get the answers to that? Thank you very much. Appreciate your support, and thank you all for coming out today.
Mr. Andrews.
Thank you all for coming out. I want to thank my opponents for their service. Each has devoted a large part of their adult life to serving the public, and I admire that. But I think it's time for a change. If we're going to have the type of leadership we need to take our county into the future, we need a leader who has shown that they will make the tough decisions, who will stand up to interest groups when they ask for too much, who doesn't have campaign funds coming to them from the groups they negotiate with as the county executive. I think that's a conflict of interest, and that's why I don't do it. I haven't taken campaign funds from PACs or developers since I first ran for the county council, because the county council votes on things that influence that. They vote on county contracts. They vote on land use issues. And it's not that we shouldn't have interest groups be active. We should. But the county executive needs to be independent of them, and so do other elected officials as well, and that's why the public financing bill is so important. I've demonstrated leadership throughout my years on the county council, whether it was championing the measures I mentioned, and I do want to acknowledge Mr. Leggett was an outstanding leader on the smoke-free restaurant law as well, and that is something that's been to the benefit of our county. But fiscally, we need someone who is going to stand up and make the tough decisions, and I've done that year after year, and I did it before the recession, and now we're back to the same kinds of patterns of large pay increases and benefit increases that we had before. That's not sustainable, and you need a county executive who is going to set the right framework, who's going to present budgets to the council that are reasonable, that don't encourage people to leave the county. We don't have a bottomless pit. We have to spend money like it's limited, because it is, and that's what I hear time and time again from people whose doors I knock on. Get the county government spending more under control, get more value for the tax dollars, because they don't have to stay here. We've got to be attractive for people to stay here, for jobs to come here, and I ask for your support in the June 24th Democratic primary. Thank you very much.